Welcome into Hardcore Penn State Football. Penn State earns another victory, this time against the Nebraska Cornhuskers. We'll get into that game as well as Kaytron Allen's record-breaking performance, Nick Singleton's record-tying performance, and of course, we'll talk about Terry Smith and potentially what that means for the Penn State coaching search. We'll wrap up by a little preview of Rutgers, and we'll get out of here. Thank you for being here. Please make sure you're subscribed, whether you're watching live on YouTube or listening on podcast. Welcome into Hardcore Penn State Football. I'm Corey Listoki. With me, as always, the great Sean Kane. How you doing today, Sean?
Doing good, Corey. I liked winning on Saturday.
Winning's fun. It's nice
Feels
to
like
win.
a true victory Tuesday.
I would say this, yeah, and I know we're not technically recording on Monday, but to me, and I think somebody did tweet this, but I was thinking about the spreads lately, and just from a pure Penn State covering perspective, you feel better. And I think Terry Smith, I think they're 4-1 against the spread under Terry Smith this year, and they were maybe 1 and something under James Franklin. They may not even had a victory against the spread yet under Franklin before he was fired. So, and I think, look, I'm not a huge betting person. I dabble from time to time, but I think it does maybe point when you see those spreads. I mean, after the Villanova game, I was like, I'm not going to take Penn State to cover this against anybody. I'm not going to take Penn State to cover that against anybody. But now it's starting to feel like, yeah, Penn State Rutgers, I think it's an 11-point spread. That feels pretty good. That feels like something Penn State can easily do. And that was not the case under James Franklin. So to your point, it feels like maybe we're figuring this out a little bit. We're getting back to where things maybe used to be. Maybe.
Yeah, we both predicted Penn State would win the national championship. And Saturday's performance is, like, if you were to tell me in August, we're going to beat Nebraska 37-10, I'd be like, okay, that sounds about right. And I probably wouldn't even get that excited about it. I'd be like, yeah, we're going to beat them around that. Okay, we're going to run all over them. All right, that sounds about right. Passing game, it's going to be efficient. All right, defense is going to be really good. And that's what we saw. It's just like if you just take that game in a vacuum, you'd be like, well, Penn State looks like one of the best teams in the country. And that's really the kick in the stomach, isn't it? That we're sitting here 5-6 now. Just because of the way that from late September to early November went. So you have to be really happy about the way the game went on Saturday, and I was. It was such an enjoyable game to watch, especially for Terry and Kaytron Allen. But that you can't help, at least in my view, thinking about that in the back of your head, like what could have been with this team.
Absolutely. And by the way, the spread's up to 13.5 now. So it opened at 10.5 and is already at 13.5, which tells me all I need to know as far as me getting that bet in early on Sunday. But I think what you're saying is exactly right. The way the game went is kind of how we expected the entire season to go, as far as dominating on the ground to set up the pass and then winning games with good defense. That's exactly what happened. Terry Smith in the press conference yesterday kind of reiterated, like, that is, what he would foresee his teams, if he continued to have the job, what he would want them to be. He mentioned on Saturday that they have an identity now, and I think that was maybe the identity they always would have had. And I want to just stop for a second and reiterate something. The biggest botch of this entire season was James Franklin getting out of character and getting away from the 1-0 mindset from the very beginning of this thing. They elected to use those first 3 games as preseason games. And they elected to work on things that were not their bread and butter. And their bread and butter was running the football and letting that offensive line dominate people. And I don't necessarily blame them for trying to get the receivers in a groove with Drew Aller. It would, they were thinking at the time they can, always run the football, but are they going to be able to throw the ball well enough against the best teams to win a national championship? That was their line of thinking. The one thing they forgot is running the football is not a light switch that you can just flip on and flip off. Running the football is a mentality. It is an identity. And when you try to run more outside zone and you try to get cute with your running and your passing game instead of leaning on your offensive line and your bread and butter, which is Kaytron Allen and Nick Singleton, and only using them sparingly because you're trying to throw first or you're trying to, do different things with the receivers, you never gave your offensive line and your running identity a chance to get in a groove, to really lean on people. And what you're seeing now these past 2 weeks is the offensive line is playing better. They are playing more physical. I saw 4 or 5 offensive linemen chasing down defenders after the whistle. We saw Kaytron Allen finish runs. We've seen Nick Singleton now even finish runs. And that was something that they did not have in September. And I think, ironically, the one time that James Franklin went away from his 1-0 mindset, it potentially cost him the season. Well, it did cost him the season, and definitely was partially to blame for him losing his job. And so, yes, Sean, it's very frustrating, but it's even more frustrating that it wasn't necessarily even not having the right players or not having, you can't replace a Tony Rojas and all of that. I get that. And I think the defense has gotten better and probably would have gotten better regardless as the year went on. But the running game and the offense, I mean, Ethan Grunkemeyer is not doing anything crazy out there. He's throwing the ball to wide open guys. I've just as much confidence that those guys would have been just as wide open if it was Drew Aller out there. I don't know if he would have hit them, but they would have been just as wide open. And the reason for how wide open they are is because they're running the ball. And so it just makes you think, Sean, getting back to your main point here, what if they just would have opened the season against, Nevada? What if they would have ran the rock hard against FIU and said, you know what? We have the receivers, but we're not going to throw first. We're not going to try to figure this out like that. We're going to run the ball, set up play action. We're going to get confidence to the receivers by sticking to our game plan, by building our identity and not worrying about what we're going to do against Oregon or what we're going to do against Ohio State.
Yeah, a lack of identity since Joe Moorhead was an issue so that would have been 2018 to late 2024 in the Penn State era, and a lack of offensive identity, I should say. And it continued into this year. We did not build off what we did in the playoffs last year, in the postseason in general. If you include the Big Ten championship game, Penn State just did not build off of that until Saturday. That's what I was expecting to see. And yeah, you have to put the blame for how this season went pretty much squarely on James Franklin's shoulders, for a number of reasons. One of them, is changing up what he did, which had been successful, week in, week out, especially against the lesser teams like a Northwestern, like a UCLA. And part of that is that, and part of it is just not holding other guys accountable. Like, one of the things about Terry Smith, yes, he is beloved by his team. And let me backtrack a little bit. I think sometimes coaches, and Franklin's not alone in this, are afraid to hold guys accountable out of fear that they could leave. Well, Corey, to be honest with you, people that leave because they're being held accountable, they're kind of losers anyway. You don't really want them around if they don't want to be coached hard. So it was wrong for Franklin to be afraid of that. A lot of coaches in today's day and age are falling into that trap.
A lot of people.
Terry Smith did not. A lot of people, yeah, they're like, oh, these young kids these days, they don't want to be told what to do, and it's not always true. Are there some people that don't? Well, sure, but you really don't want them around if that's the case. And Corey made a good point on Twitter as well about AJ Harris. AJ Harris was he got benched during the Northwestern game and by Terry Smith. Now, that was Franklin's last game, but Terry Smith made that call to bench him. And AJ Harris was one of the guys holding the little flyer up that said hire Terry Smith at the end of the game. And that shows you right there that these guys do want accountability. They don't want a guy that they could just kind of walk all over. And I think that a little bit of that happened with James Franklin, especially at the end. And guys stopped being held accountable for things, and what happened. And I think an attitude change was really what was needed, and Terry was the guy to do it.
And we're going to talk a lot about Terry Smith, I'm sure, very shortly. Before we do, though, Sean, I don't want to get any further in the episode without talking about Kaytron Allen. Fat Man officially breaks Evan Royster's career rushing yard record with over 100. He ended up at 150, 160 something, I think, on the day. Technically broke it on like a little short run, but really the exclamation point was on when it was on a longer touchdown run to really put the game out of reach. And actually, ironically, it was one of the few times he wasn't really touched very much, which is not really how his entire career went at Penn State. I'll say this about the record. Yes, Saquon had one less year. Attempts-wise, he still had a bunch of attempts in his career. So that being said, Kaytron Allen, I know people are going to be like, well, he, split carries with Singleton. If you look at his career attempts, he still toted the rock a ton.
Yeah.
I think I want to say he's at 700, but I'm not positive. He's at a lot of attempts in his tenure. And so I do think when you think of it, when it's all said, and Kaytron Allen is probably a top 10 Penn State running back. Maybe we need to do those drafts again soon, Sean, that we did a couple of years ago. But I mean, if you want to do it by just yards per carry, then Larry Johnson's your number one. I think he's at like 6.5 yards per carry. So I think there's always going to be a blend of all of that. But I do think one thing that, we can talk about Kaytron forever. The one thing I think Kaytron Allen kind of reminds me of Maurice Jones-Drew to a certain degree is nobody ever gets a clean hit on him. Nobody ever lowers the boom on him. It almost feels like he slips off of everything and someone might tackle him, but they're never getting a good shot on him. He always finds a way to be almost like a greasy pig that just nobody seems to be able to really obviously corral a lot of the times. But even if they do, they don't seem to ever really hit him or hit him hard. And he always seems to end up, landing forward. But, last thing, Kaytron Allen I think T. Frank maybe said this, but the fact that I thought maybe he would be more of the bruiser and maybe he would get more of the touches around the goal line. Very, very kind of funny that he breaks the record while Singleton most likely here against Rutgers will be breaking the touchdown record. You could almost think that maybe those would have been flopped, at least from a rushing touchdowns perspective, but that's where we stand. And the best part about it is Kaytron Allen's not done. Still has time to continue to add yardage to his career. That honestly, Sean, I'm sure they've said this every time the record was set. Hard to imagine the record gets broken anytime soon.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to require a guy to most likely, unless you're a freak like Saquon. Even Saquon was able to do it in 3 years. He wasn't able to catch Evan Royster, who was the number one. And Royster had 4 years. He was behind Tony Hunt his freshman year, but he played a lot. So, but I still think Royster had less attempts. Another thing with these records that really isn't fair to the old heads, the bowl games that didn't count until about the year 2000. So Kurt Warner, for example, you older fans will remember better than I would. He was very good in bowl games. He outrushed Marcus Allen, and he outrushed Herschel Walker in their respective bowl games. So that shows you how good Kurt Warner was. Kajana's long run against Oregon does not count toward his record or toward his rushing total. So little unfair to them, but is this well-deserved? Absolutely. I still think Kaytron Allen's one of my favorite running backs ever here. I kind of comp him to like Tony Hunt, but more twitch. Just more elusive. He's gotten faster as he's gotten older. It took really until late in his junior year to really pick up that speed. I know one of the things that's talked about a lot is Kaytron. This was his first year where he was able to be healthy during the winter and spring. So he was always coming back from injury going, and the really first time he really started playing a lot wasn't until the summer. So that kind of puts you behind the 8 ball a little bit. And he was still able to go and set the rushing record. He's got to be one of your favorite guys here because we've been very hard on this football team. But one of the things that Corey and I always kind of rush to say is our criticisms, especially around effort and things like that, never applies to Kaytron Allen. Because Kaytron just brings it every single day. Even when we were in the middle of, I think Terry Smith describes it as the storm, Kaytron was still coming to work every day and playing great ball. So really proud of Kaytron and really happy for him.
The whole thing about not getting the stats account for the bowl game, I love how we sit here we can't do anything about it. Nobody is stopping. No one's stopping somebody from saying, actually, we're going to start counting that. Let's update the record books.
You could go back.
It's not like we don't have the stats from the games to be able to fix that. So I always thought that was so funny where it's well, if we wanted to start, if we think it's unfair and we all agree it's not fair, why don't we just fix it?
Yeah, it's not like they were playing these games when George Washington was alive.
Right.
This was 1994. Right. This was 1982. All these guys are still alive, and I thought
that was hysterical. Also, he's already over 1,000 yards for the year, which is a little bit notable, given that he finished last year at 1,100 yards, and obviously they had the Big Ten championship. They had 3 additional bowl games in the playoff. So the fact that he's already there kind of shows you that he's there, and he's averaging 0.7 yards per carry better than last year. And so he's actually under, call it 16 carries than last year to this point. So he'll probably end up with more carries than last year, which is not surprising, but if he keeps up his average, he's going to do much better than last year. And obviously, Singleton's at 463 yards. He had a pair of touchdowns, which now ties him for Saquon Barkley for the most rushing touchdowns in a career, as well as most total touchdowns in a career. And obviously, one more rushing touchdown would break both of those records. He's not having that's a crazy thing. And I know he's been better lately. And people have said that, but he's not having a terrible year. He's at 4.1 yards per carry now on 463 yards with 11 touchdowns. Yes, that's not starter quality, but if we assume that Kaytron Allen was the starter, Nick Singleton was the backup, and your backup running back has 11 touchdowns and 500 yards, typically that would be a very good season for your backup running back. I know that's not the circumstances we live in, but I thought that was at least relevant when looking at these rushing stats. Obviously not to the expectations that Singleton had ended the year. Obviously, compared to the Notre Dame running backs, those two guys have shined a little bit more over there in South Bend. But in general, it's nice to see Singleton and Allen kind of, and again, knock on wood, it's not official, but both break records and both end up in the record book for what we think to be a long time.
Yeah, you got to give Singleton a lot of credit. That's a ton of touchdowns, obviously, and that's big accomplishment from him. And it's again similar to Kaytron. It speaks to how relatively consistent they've been, and also their durability. Like these guys in season haven't been hurt a ton. Singleton got hurt last year for what, 1 or 2 games. I think he missed the UCLA game last season. But outside of that, it's the only game I remember either of them missing. I'm sure there's another one mixed in there somewhere. But their durability, their consistency, and even though Singleton, he didn't have the year he wanted to have, he's still one of the best home run threats from running back, of my lifetime. He's right up there, Saquon, Jeremy Brown, and then Nick Singleton. As far as home run threats, where you give them the ball, they're going to fly. And right. One of the problems too, part of it wasn't really his fault. At the beginning of the year, we weren't really using him correctly. Like I knew when we flanked him out wide on Saturday to throw the ball to him, I knew that was going to go far as long as we blocked it well. And we did. And he got like a 30, 40-yard gain. Like that's Nick Singleton's game. And if he's going to succeed in the NFL, and I do have some questions about Nick Singleton in the NFL, it's going to have to be in that Austin Eckler role. And that's I wish Penn State used him more like that. Peter.
Yeah, and I think the Eagles have done that with Saquon quite well as far as lining him outside as a receiver. I expect him to be kind of used like that. I mean, you go back to Mike Yursich days, like they would line him outside on the fourth down opportunities and just run a bubble screen to him and just say, go get the first down one-on-one with whatever defensive back it is. And you feel pretty good about that. And you really feel good about his pass catching ability, which I think is where he shines. Sean, one thing that's interesting, and not that any of it really matters because we have no idea who's going to enter the transfer portal. But Penn State has no idea who the running back is going to be in 2026. Now, even if Franklin was the coach and everything was normal in the world, we still would have had no idea. No idea. And so, that's one thing when I was looking at the stat sheet a second ago, I'm just like, obviously people are going to go. But the one thing that's interesting about that position, and it's the one thing I think about when I think about the linebacker position too, is yes, people maybe have the desire to leave. Maybe they just want to follow James Franklin, so be it. But if you're just looking at playing time opportunities, if you're a running back, if you're Corey Smith, if you're Quentin Martin Jr., if you're Cam Wallace, where else are you going to go to have an opportunity at a Big Ten school, top 10 school in the country, where you have a direct path to be the starter? And even if you lose all of the coaching staff, you still have a great opportunity to be the starter. I think about those things. Same thing with linebacker, like if Amari Campbell or Tony Rojas decide to come back. We talked about that last episode, so we don't have to hash into it. But again, where else could they go? And I'm not saying they're bad linebackers, but they have a guaranteed starting role at Penn State. The Penn State running backs, they have a clear shot. Especially running back is hard to break into a depth chart at other places. Where else are you going to go where you are almost guaranteed, in some cases, a 33% chance of starting at running back? Or, you could argue maybe Corey Smith has a little bit of a leg up, or Cam Wallace has a little bit of leg up since Quentin Martin Jr. has been hurt. Where else are you going to go that you have that big of an opportunity? And you could probably pick out a couple other positions that are like that. But I am curious how much that weighs into all of this. And if the running backs, if Singleton and Kaytron decide not to play in the bowl game, which Terry Smith was asked about that, he had a good point that now the portal is moved back. There's really no excuse for them not to play. And he said we might have a couple outliers. Well, okay, let's just play devil's advocate for a second, Sean. Terry Smith gets the job. They give it to him. Would you really want Singleton or Allen to even play in the Pinstripe Bowl against Pitt? I don't see why you would want to do that. There's no reason why I'm not like, hey guys, appreciate you. You can suit up if you want, but I want to see who I have at running back because I haven't seen anything for basically a year and a half.
Yeah, I can't picture Terry doing that, but yeah, I don't think they'd be chasing them down. Like if they want to move on, I kind of get that. I think they should play. really, because neither of them are going to be first-round picks. So, in my view, you should play the bowl game. It doesn't really matter which bowl game you're in. You want to showcase your talents. And the thing with bowl games is you're still typically the only show on, even if it's the Pinstripe Bowl. There's not a whole lot going on day after Christmas. If that is indeed the bowl game we go to, we still got to win this week. But yeah, and then you look at what we have coming back next year. Another name that you should probably keep in mind is Tyke Hayes. They really liked what they saw from him in camp. I think he's been banged up this year as well, and just the logjam that we have at running back. But that logjam gets cleared up going into next season, and a lot of it is going to depend on the coach, who that coach is. If it is Terry Smith, I think not just running back, but more guys are going to be more inclined to stay from what it seems like. But then part of it's going to depend on whether the new coach wants them. Like, the new coach might be like, all right, thanks, guys. How many carries did you have last year? Oh, 0. Okay, I'm bringing in my old guys. Like, that's a possibility, and that's something that Penn State fans haven't really had to deal with before. His portal was not like there was no portal when James Franklin took over. There was, you transfer, and there'd be like Penn State would get like maybe a transfer to every year.
Trace McSorley for kind of the similar purposes.
He decommitted though. That was a little different, but there wasn't like the portal where, you have we have thousands of guys jump in every year.
Donnie on YouTube says Kajana Carter was the best Penn State running back home threat of his lifetime. Donnie, your lifetime's not over, so don't sound too morbid there.
Kajana was before me.
But appreciate you being here. Appreciate everyone being live on YouTube. Make sure you've liked the video and subscribed. All right. Well, I just wanted to touch base on Ethan Grunkemeyer real quick about the game. How much do you take away from that game? Sean, you and I had talked a little bit right afterwards. I get the stat line looks good. I agree he's playing better, but also there were some wide open guys, and he was asked not to do very much. Now, he didn't mess up what he was asked to do, but he was not asked to do very much. Yes, a step in the right direction, in my opinion, but I'm not sure if I'm like, oh yeah, I'm all in on Ethan Grunkemeyer to be the starting quarterback for 2026, even if we could have him. But I'm curious where you're at.
Yeah, I'm not all the way in on him, but I'm not all the way out either. There are quarterbacks out there that could screw up the one-car funeral. And Ethan Grunkemeyer is not one of those guys. And overall, Corey, and I'm grading him on a curve, being that it's his first time playing. He played against 3 top 6 or 7 defenses in the country. I'd probably give him a B+ with how well he's played so far. There are some concerns I have about him. Like, his pocket presence really isn't that good. I don't think he really knows when to step up, when to move. That sack on Saturday was really on him because nobody was open, and you got to either throw it or run at that point. And sometimes I think he struggles knowing when to do that. Sometimes that comes with experience, but I'm not seeing that at a consistent basis yet. But he's accurate for the most part. He's not afraid to take some shots. He's about as mobile as Drew, I'd say. He's not as big, but he's about as mobile as him. So there are some things to like about him. And I think he was put in a position where after, being at this point in the season where we'd be like, we want nothing to do with Ethan Grunkemeyer next year. And I don't think either of us are there. Like, where we're like, no, he needs to go. And no, he might stay. It depends. Part of it depends on who the coach is. Like, if it's Terry Smith, I could absolutely see Ethan Grunkemeyer being the quarterback. If it's not, I think his chances do go down a bit, depending on who we do bring in.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. We're not like, oh, this is bad. So I think that's fair.
We're also not like, oh, the Messiah's here.
Right. Offensive line was fun to watch. I actually, after the game got home, I actually rewatched the game that night. So I stayed up to about 2 a.m. rewatching the game because I was so excited to watch the film. We give a lot of crap to Drew Shelton on here, at least this year we have. I thought Drew Shelton played his best game potentially of his entire career at Penn State. Very good in the run game, very good in the pass blocking. Just all in all, I thought he played great. Anthony Dunca, Nick Dawkins, even, and of course Vega were just chasing people down, finding someone to hit. Don't know where that was. I guess maybe we don't need Frank Leonard because we do have that somewhere bottled inside of us. It was nice to see that on Saturday. There was a couple times I thought we were going to get flagged for the way Donko was chasing people down. So that was really nice to see. I'm just going to be honest, since we're being transparent about it, I didn't think Nolan Ritchie played great. He had a couple of bad plays that I happened to see, and I haven't slowed down the frame by frame and looked at it. But Nolan Ritchie had a couple of misses, but even he, I think, had an okay day. It wasn't like it was a bad day. So all in all, really, really happy. And let me just say, too, that the offensive line includes the tight ends. Andrew Rappelier and Khalil Dinkins blocked really well. Rappelier blocked exceptionally well. And shout out to Kobe Howard. He had 2 blocks in the run game on Saturday. And I could have swore some coach at one point said that he needs to be a better blocker on special teams in order to play or something like that. Well, he blocked really well even in running situations. Now, a couple times he got helped out a little bit and maybe didn't do too much, but he did a really good job of getting in the way, which is sometimes all you can ask. So shout out to Kobe Howard. Just in general, the run, Kyron Hudson also blocked really well, had a pancake block on the touchdown on the pick route, screen route. But he had a couple other really good blocks too. So shout out to the receivers and tight ends as well. That's what sprung some of these runs that could have gone for 8 yards to go for 12 or 15 or 30. So all in all, great effort. They were really leaning on that run game, even against boxes that were not friendly to run the football in.
Yeah. It was the best game the offensive line played the whole season. I don't think anybody would question that. PFF, for all you PFF people, Penn State won offensive line of the week. And we know how we look at PFF. If it's good things, we take it 100%. This is the gospel. If it's bad, what do they know? They don't know how to grade tape. But no, they played. The offensive line played really, really well. They held up in pass protection. Like I said, the one sack they gave up, I thought it was actually on Grunk. It wasn't really on them. And they just ran guys over. They made things much easier for Kaytron than he was used to. And we always say Singleton needs them to block well or he is not going to look good. And they did, and he looked good. So I was also, I got to be honest too, I was surprised Nebraska looked as bad as they did. Yikes. I did not expect a Matt Rule team, and a lot of people have told me we're going to be much tougher if we get Matt Rule. That didn't look like a tough team to me. We ran right through them like we were playing a FCS team. But they're not an FCS team, and that's more of a testament of Penn State for how well we played, because that team was 7-3. It kind of looked like we were the 7-3 team, and they were the 4-6 team. So it's funny, kind of just the way that it turned out like that.
Yeah, and they were coming off a bye too, mind you.
Yeah.
So take that for what you will as well. I thought their quarterback actually could be pretty good long term. I know he was.
Yeah, I thought he was okay.
He had some really nice throws, and he's pretty quick. There's some things. To be honest with you, I see more long term ability with him than I do with Grunkemeyer, from a physical trait perspective. He could run, and he had some good quality throws on the run, and he had some zip to his throw. So Latif is maybe someone to pay attention to moving forward. I thought I was impressed, given that he was running for his life most of the day. And their running back too. Is it Emmett Johnson? Is that right?
Yeah.
I mentioned him, before, but even though he was their entire offense, he was running and catching. He was doing everything. I think he ended up with 130 total yards ish. He's something special. And it's funny that they were saying during the TV broadcast that Dana Holgerson was the one that really got him playing time. And it was somebody that Rule had not really had ruled out. And so very interesting there that they were able to do that. So I wanted to bring that up defensively, Sean. A weird game in a sense that Penn State won convincingly, but didn't get a turnover. 0 turnovers for either side. Defensively, I think we said this last week, but the superstars are finally making plays. And I think when you talk about Terry Smith and the accountability, straight up, Dennis-Sutton was asked about this after the game. And why are the stars showing up? And he straight up said, and was trying not to throw shade at James Franklin, but I don't know how you say this without it. But basically, the stars were not being held to the same standard as everybody else. And the young guys were being called out for things that the stars were doing. And that's not happening anymore. So Terry Smith doesn't have to take the shot at Franklin, and Dennis-Sutton doesn't have to take the shot at James Franklin, but I will. That's bullshit. And if that stuff was happening to a level at which Dennis-Sutton felt comfortable sharing, then that must have been happening a ton. And we asked those questions on like, why didn't the studs from last year act like studs this year? I'm very concerned that we wasted an entire offseason, Sean. Like, why did some of our best players not improve? I'm starting to really believe nobody was holding anybody accountable. But regardless of all of that, I'm sure you'll have more to say on it in a second. The studs are playing like studs now. Zane Durant is playing much better. Dennis-Sutton is on an absolute tear. Zakee Whitley was always playing well. I think AJ Harris is playing a little bit better as well. It's nice to see these guys begin to play to their potential. Again, bittersweet, I'm sure. But the big reason for why this defense is better, yes, they simplified some things. They're being more aggressive, and honestly, they're just learning more. But at the same time, when they really need a big play, their big players are stepping up.
Yeah, we were pretty critical of Zane Durant tonight and at the beginning of the year in particular, and they've been all over the field the last few games, including the Indiana game. So they've been really, really good this last month of the season. You do have to wonder where that was, and like DDS said, accountability. If you let guys skate by, like, you have to keep in mind too, these are still college kids. These are college kids with a lot of money now. And these are college kids that have had success. So what do you do when you're a kid, Corey? You kind of think you know all the answers, right? And you go,
I still think that way.
Yeah. Yeah, you kind of go like, yeah, we're all right. We made the semifinals last year. We nearly, in their mind, we nearly won the national championship. Oh, we didn't play great against Villanova. Ooh, we didn't play great against FIU. Oh, what are we going to do? Well, then reality hits you in the face, and you get beat by Oregon, and you get your asses kicked out at UCLA in the first half, and then you end up losing the game. Like, reality has a way of setting in, and it's hard to turn that switch back on. And then if the coach isn't stopping the bleeding then and starting to hold guys accountable, well, first off, it might even be too late because they could tune you out. And you're not going to convince me that this team to tune James Franklin out at some point. I don't know when that happened, but at some point they did. Because I remember when he first got fired, they were like, oh, it feels like we got him fired. Like, yeah, you did. yes, you did. It's James Franklin's fault, but yeah, like that's what happened. You guys quit on him. you rolled over against mediocre Northwestern. You didn't get the ball back at the end of the game. Like, yeah, you guys quit. But now Terry Smith found something, and they're playing like they should have been playing all along.
Is there a certain level too where I get confused on is everyone's so concerned about these players going to Virginia Tech next year. I understand why the recruits go. They were recruited. He was in their living rooms. He promised these things. They feel like they've built that connection with Franklin. That the best chance they see the field is with those, with that coach. I get that. But how many of these players after seeing what Terry Smith has done, after rallying the troops, hopefully getting back to a bowl game and cleaning some of this up, how many of them have that kind of moment, Sean? Or maybe they don't say at Penn State, but maybe are like, why would I then go to Virginia Tech and potentially deal with that all over again? I'm curious how many of them have seen that light where, yeah, I don't really want to be at Penn State anymore, but I'm not necessarily going back to the same situation I was just in after because they've never been coached by anybody else at the college level, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like this is the first time that they're experiencing someone other than James Franklin. Now I recognize that he, in a way, is a disciple of James Franklin, but clearly the tendencies are different. And so I would just be curious. Obviously, kids are going to enter the portal, so be it. Where they go will be very interesting because obviously the recruits are going to follow James Franklin. We've seen a couple more head that way. Our former coworker here when we were with Mercury, Aeneas Hawkins, also went over there. So I get it. But long term, do we see a lot of the players also head that way? Maybe some of the freshmen, right? But that were recently out. But I'd be very curious to see how many sophomores, juniors are like, yeah, I want to go back into that versus I just want to go somewhere else or stay at Penn State.
Yeah, I'm glad you made that distinction between the younger guys and the older guys because the older guys knew what we had here. And it's kind of like when you're a young buck and you've only had one coach, you're still like, yeah, I like Coach Franklin. And don't get me wrong, I think all the guys I think that's sincere that all the guys love James Franklin. I think that's real. They do have a genuine relationship with him. But that doesn't necessarily mean they can't quit on him. They could still say, oh, he's a great guy, but I'm kind of done now, and I'm going to tune him out. And that both of those things could be true. So, yeah, the younger guys might still want to give him a chance, but I don't know if the older guys necessarily would. And I think there's an assumption out there, and believe me, it could still happen, that Tony Rojas, particularly, Virginia kid, is gonna follow James Franklin to Virginia Tech. But he kind of poured cold water on it himself today, a little bit. Somebody tweeted, "You're 100% getting Tony Rojas. Amari Campbell, I doubt would go to VT. He's had a hell of a year, so if it's not PSU, I see a lot of schools reaching out to him." Tony Rojas replied with a thumbs down emoji. So maybe he's pouring cold water on that a little bit. That may mean absolutely nothing, and he'll end up at Virginia Tech. But if Penn State keeps Terry Smith, again, I think that increases the chances of keeping the roster together and keeping a guy like Tony Rojas here.
Yeah,
and if we make the right hire, doesn't necessarily need to be Terry, but yeah, I think Terry Smith gives you the best chance to retain a lot of the roster.
Let's before we get into the Terry Smith conversation, it's going to take us to the end of the episode. Let's go ahead with our Rutgers stuff. Penn State takes on Rutgers at Rutgers. And
are you going?
I'm not going. Are you going?
No.
3:30 game. Greg Schiano was on the staff when Terry Smith was playing at Penn State, so there's a little bit of a connection there that I wanted to make note of. Rutgers is also battling for bowl eligibility. Both teams are 5-6, so it's obviously their senior day, so they got some momentum as far as those things are concerned, and desperation mode to potentially meet a bowl game. That'd be pretty cool for Rutgers if they're able to knock Penn State out of a potential bowl game and go to a bowl game themselves. So totally can see the value in that and whatnot. I just think that Penn State has kind of figured this thing out, and maybe not all of it out, but I think they are in a good enough spot, and I do think they want to win and to continue to play. So I think they have found enough of a recipe with the run and the play action, and don't have to be great on defense to slow down Rutgers. And so I'm going to take Penn State to win. I'm going to take them to cover. I have them winning 34-14, and not a bold prediction, but I just want to say it anyway. I think Singleton breaks the record on Saturday. And I think he gets 1 rushing and 1 total touchdown. So not that he needs 1 of each, but I think he gets 2 again.
Yeah. When you said the line earlier, I honestly didn't know what the line was, and I thought it's a little low. I feel like Penn State's gonna win by more. So I'm also taking Penn State. Rutgers actually reminds me a little bit of Nebraska. I think Nebraska is a tad better, but they're kind of similar teams in a lot of ways. Penn State has had a lot of success at Piscataway. I'm not sure if you've ever lost there. I know we lost once in the 80s to Rutgers, but I'm pretty sure it was at home. So I think Penn State goes on the road, takes care of business. They're playing for that bowl. Penn State wins it. I'm going to take Penn State to get in the 40s and win this one 42-13. And I'm going to say Mr. Grunkemeyer throws 3 touchdown passes.
Wow. Singleton gets the record as well?
Singleton gets the record. They're going to do everything they can to get Nick the record, which they should.
All right. We got all that out of the way. We can talk about coaching search now. So if you just waited for this the entire episode, we'll now talk about the coaching search. So appreciate your patience. Sean, let me just lay out I think what you and I do agree with. Terry Smith moved up both of our lists after Saturday. I think from a standpoint of if you're going to take a risk on a coordinator, at that point, why don't you just take a risk on Terry Smith? I think we're kind of in agreement there. That being said, he's not at the top of our list. If a Kalen DeBoer decides to come, we want Kalen DeBoer. I think where then after that, it gets a little bit muddier as far as you and I. But I want to talk about Terry Smith as a whole here first. I'm going to try to say this without absolutely pissing off everybody. I recognize that Terry Smith has the opportunity to be the head coach and he can do what he likes. And if he wants to honor Joe Paterno, he has every right to honor Joe Paterno. I do find it very coincidental that despite how many times he was on the sideline, and maybe it wasn't up to him, maybe the previous coach and the administration wouldn't have allowed him to do this, and he would have to listen to the head coach. But even then, he did not wear a Joe 409 pin for the Indiana game. He did not wear it on the road when they faced at Iowa or at Ohio State. And he did not wear it at home against Indiana. And so choosing to wear that pin when he did very much seemed intentional, that he was trying to earn the vote as if this is a democracy and you and I are going to get a ballot in the mail tomorrow from Pat Kraft on who we want. But he was trying to earn the fans and the Letterman vote. And I think he has won. I mean, I was in the crowd. I heard the chanting for Terry Smith. You heard it on TV. They were chanting Terry Smith. And he walked into the tunnel with them chanting his name, which is a very, massive juxtaposition from what Franklin experienced just over a month ago. I think 7 weeks ago. I get all that. But at the same time, I'm curious that pandering, if you want to use a very negative word, which is probably not fair, but to a certain degree, it was a kind of a, I'm going to show you my hand and I'm going to push the envelope on you, Kraft, and I'm going to gain respect and support. And I'm almost going to make it if you choose someone else, you're going against Penn State fans and Penn State Letterman, which does put added pressure on Kraft to choose somebody else. Now, is it a negative thing? Is Terry Smith trying to punish Kraft or this program for not choosing him? Not necessarily, but he is. And honestly, I don't blame him. Like, if you got one shot at this as Terry Smith, why not play all of the cards you absolutely have? Why not wear the Joe Paterno pin? Why not, put the numbers back on the helmets? Do anything you can to get people excited again. And I think he has the right to do all of that. But did that help him earn the job? If he comes out, if he's considered, we already know he's a truth teller. wear your emotions on your sleeve kind of guy, tell it as it is, accountability guy. We love all those things about him. But would the administration love all of those things about him? And look, don't be naive about this. Whether you love Joe Paterno or you think Joe Paterno was maybe a sleazebag, I don't really care. That's not the argument. But the administration still has to somehow balance that public view and obviously still support Joe Paterno, but not maybe come off like they're the biggest Joe Paterno supporters ever. And now, is that the right thing to do or not? I don't know. But that is the true landscape of what they're having to balance. And if they see Terry Smith as someone who creates, if Franklin was on one side of the spectrum and he was on the other, is that too much of a lean in the other way too quickly? I don't know. But it's something that could potentially hurt him in this entire process. And so I don't blame him for taking that opportunity. And I'm so excited and happy for him that he got to have that moment when he said that his grandkids got to hear his name being chanted as he walked out of the tunnel. That's awesome. Gave me goosebumps. I was getting goosebumps rewatching the game on Saturday night after I saw it in person just 3 hours ago. It was an emotional, awesome experience. But does he have a legitimate shot of being the next head coach at Penn State? Probably more than he did a week or two ago. But if he had the opportunity to prove it on the field, we have to take his entire body of work. And whether it's fair or not, he did lose to Iowa, a game he probably in hindsight shouldn't have lost. He did lose to Indiana, which is probably not fair, but a game he probably could have won, should have won, depending on when you tuned into that football game. So he has had the opportunity to build a resume where the card stacked against him. Absolutely. Is he playing every card that he can anyway? Absolutely. But I'm very curious to see how this all turns out. And I think he's put himself in a position, Sean, where it's, I will be the next head coach at Penn State, or I'm probably not welcome anywhere. And it puts all the players that he works with, like you said, in a kind of serious bind where it's like, well, I just did all that and now he's gone. Now what do I do? And you can't make decisions off, the feelings of 19 and 20-year-olds because they're not going to be here in 2 years. But I do think the landscape of this, Sean, a month ago, you and I weren't even really considering Terry Smith. And now it's not even only are we considering Terry Smith, it's the dude walked out of the stadium with everyone chanting his name. He got the Rudy moment. And it's a very different conversation than it was a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, I think I'll talk about the human aspect of it. It was a very Disney type moment. Like my wife's a huge Disney fan. She's all in on maybe Terry Smith, the head coach now. Like that's just how it is because it played on your emotions, and emotions are kind of a dangerous thing sometimes when you're deciding these things. Like some of the things Terry's going to have to answer, I think his interview already happened. And one of the things he would have to address is staffing. How are you going to attack NIL? How are you going to attack the portal? Staffing, he's only been at Penn State and Temple, and he's been a legendary high school coach. So I think he's going to be fine in recruiting. I'm really not that worried about Terry with recruiting. But what kind of staff is he going to put together? Because he's going to lose some of these staff members. He's probably going to fire Marquise Hagans if he were to stay, if Terry Smith were to get the job. I hope he does. He's probably going to fire Andy Kotelnicki. So who are you going to replace these guys with? And then Franklin's probably going to take at least a guy or two from the staff. And how are you going to replace those guys? So he's got to have a list of guys that he could get, that he's going to go after and be able to reel in. And then the portal, I think James Franklin's way of attacking the portal, it just didn't work. And I think it's just not the way college football is going right now. I think it's going away from what James Franklin wanted to do. And Terry Smith has to have an answer for that. So that's the type of stuff that him as the CEO will need to have answers for, because being the head coach, you wear so many different hats, and you're not just, Terry, the great cornerback coach who everybody loves and rallies around. It's a whole different deal when you are the guy in the seat 365 days a year. So I think he helped himself by doing all that campaigning. Some people think he hurt himself. I don't. I think his goal was to build up, whether this was right or wrong, it was kind of Machiavellian, in my opinion. He was trying to build up support from the lettermen and from the boosters. And I think that 409 thing helped him because Pat Kraft is going to look at that. He's going to hear all that stuff from the boosters. And he may not be thrilled that Terry did it, but it really doesn't matter because he's going to be getting that pressure from the lettermen, from the fans, and from the boosters now. And that 409 thing, the signs, Terry Smith for head coach, maybe you can interpret that as a little campy. I thought it was cute, like the players really do love that guy, and it seems it's very genuine. So I'm at the point now, Corey, that if you don't get Kalen DeBoer or another huge name, I don't know if Marcus Freeman or one of these other big names are going to get involved here that's not really being talked about. If you don't get one of them, I'm at the point, why am I going to hire Bob Chesney over Terry Smith? I feel like I have a lot more questions about Bob Chesney than I do about Terry Smith. I have no idea how the hell he's going to recruit here when has
him just as well as country music.
Exactly. I thought Keith Urban was dead and he's rocking at the CMAs apparently.
That was great that a lot of people came to X afterwards on you for that. That was fantastic.
Yeah, not a country music fan, but Bob Chesney, and then how did Brent Key's guys look on Saturday? How did Eli Drinkowitz's guys look? All these guys have, just because they have head coaching experience doesn't mean they're going to be the right fit at Penn State. And the way college football is right now, I'd want to hire Terry over a lot of those guys. Not Kalen DeBoer. I'm not insane. Not, one of these superstar coaches. But all the other guys that are kind of being mentioned, I take Terry Smith personally. And it may not be. And the other thing, I saw this floated a couple places too. Well, you could just give him a year. Or you could give him 2 years. No. That's the worst thing we could do. If you're going to hire Terry, you got to give him 4 years. Why do you got to give him 4 years? You have to be able to say to recruits, I'm going to be here your whole length of time. And you have to be able to give Terry all the resources that you give any other coach. Just like Michigan did with Sherrone Moore. Now, jury's out on Sherrone Moore. But I know he could recruit well. I know he brought in the number one quarterback in the country last year. And like I said, jury's out on him. But if you want to look at other interims that have been successful, Dabo Smith was an interim. Brent Key himself, even though I had some questions about him here at Penn State, he's been very successful at Georgia Tech. So the interim to permanent coach route has been taken before, and guys have had success with it. But you have to give him the keys for real. You can't just say, we're just going to experiment for a year or two here. No. You don't have time to experiment. That's the worst thing we could do in this whole process. I'd rather hire somebody else then if you're going to play that game.
And I think what you said there about the whole Disney thing plays a little bit into how I feel too, because if you're trying to win a national championship, you probably do want Bob Chesney over Terry Smith. Terry Smith made some coaching errors, and he probably would make a couple more coaching errors, game decisions, clock management decisions. You don't know what staff he's going to
improve on that, though.
He can improve on that, but are you wanting a coach that has to improve on those things? That's the question that Kraft has to answer. Can you improve on those fast enough to win a national championship? I don't know. And maybe he can. And maybe other coaches aren't that much better, and it doesn't really matter. But obviously, being there Saturday, you want them, you want him to have an opportunity. And I think that part about knowing Penn State, maybe that sounds cliche, but there is a certain part of you, whether or not you're a huge Joe Paterno guy or you're even a relatively new Penn State fan and didn't watch the football, didn't watch football in the 90s or even the early 2000s, everybody kind of knows what that means regardless. And that matters. And go ahead.
I'll be honest with you. That's the part I care the least amount about. I don't really care how well you know Penn State. And I'm probably
then I don't think you want them then.
No. I still might, because I look at the roster and what he could keep here.
See, I don't care about that, Sean. They're all going to be gone in 2 years. Who the hell cares?
They're not. Well, they're not all. We have so much young talent here. You have a room stocked of talent in that defensive end room.
Yeah, but there's no.
He
promise.
is your best chance to keep this roster together. Why? What?
Why is that a guarantee that besides his defensive backs, why is there any guarantee that they would stay more?
Because
a lot of the guys that were advocating for him, Anthony Dunca, AJ Harris, a lot of those guys aren't even going to be here.
No,
do we know for a fact that it wasn't just the
upperclassmen though? No, I'm not saying we're going to keep 100% of the roster together, but do I think he'll be able to keep more of the roster together than bring in the JMU guy? Yeah, I do. I don't think that's an insane thing to think.
No, I don't think that's an insane thing to think, but you're acting like it's a guarantee that they're going to be able to keep enough of the guys for it to make a difference. I'm saying, do we care if we keep most of those guys? Because the new coach is going to bring in his guys anyway.
No, but like the difference makers, I do want to keep. I think keeping a guy like Darius Dixon is super important. I think keeping a guy like a Kobe Howard, like an Ivan Kamaju is super important. Am I going to guarantee Terry Smith's going to be able to keep all of them? No. But do I think he has a better chance than a lot of the coaches mentioned? Yes.
Sure. But I don't know if that percentage is so high that dictates who your next head coach is going to be for the next half decade.
Well, it shouldn't necessarily. But if he has a true plan, and I think he could recruit really well, like that's the other concern I have with Bob Chesney. How's he going to recruit? Like I think
they don't
Terry
like country
Smith
music. Your host.
I think Terry Smith's going to kill it in recruiting. It's one of the main reasons I want to keep him. True, he's never been the head coach doing this before, but he's always been our best recruiter on staff. I think he's going to get more money from the boosters because
will he be able to recruit outside of Pennsylvania?
That's a good question. That's a good question, but I will say James Franklin took Terry Smith on most of his recruiting trips with him.
Yeah.
So he does have connections outside of Pennsylvania. Now, it's true he's never been the head guy, and that does concern me a little bit. So I do want to touch on, though, how I don't really care that he's a Penn State guy. Okay. I want to get the – no, that's okay. I want to get the best coach for Penn State. I don't really care that he played for Joe. I don't really care that he knows this place. In some ways, that makes me want you less. That's just me. I don't really care that he knows what happened in the 1991 Fiesta Bowl. Okay. Why do I care about that?
What about from an identity perspective? Do you think that's a bunch of malarkey as well? Like, do you think Penn State has an identity?
Mostly yes. Okay. Mostly yes. Like I don't want the 1989 offense back. I don't. I understand there's a people want, when they think of Penn State, they think of toughness. They think of toughness, basically. I kind of get that. But are you telling me that the only coach that's going to make us tough is a Penn Stater? No, it's not. That's not something just unique to Penn State.
Right. It's like an attacking defensive coordinator is what you're getting at? Being an aggressive defensive coordinator?
I don't think I'm
every defensive coordinator says they're going to be aggressive and they're going to
yeah, we're going to be an attacking defense. One thing I'll give Jim Knowles, he never said that, and
he definitely
we were not until game 10.
Absolutely, that's a good
we were not. I'll give him
that about that.
Yeah, because attacking was definitely not one of the words I'd use.
No, and that's hysterical in hindsight now that we hadn't come up with that more recently. Sean, okay. So you are in the same impression I am that either Smith gets a head coaching job or he's gone.
Not necessarily. I will say
Because
he was much more calm at the Monday presser.
right.
Yeah, not necessarily. However, one of the things that he may have trouble with is the next head coach might be like, gonna have a bit of a divided locker room here.
So couldn't you
So
get best of both worlds is what I'm getting at.
I think it's possible. Yeah, I think there's a world that exists. Yeah, and that's true. I think that's a decent point too. That they'll be like, well, Terry's still going to be here. Now, I think at that point, it's probably going to be mostly his corners that are affected. If we hire a Bob Chesney, for example. It's not that I don't want people to get the impression that like I would
you hate Bob
Chesney.
Like, Bob Chesney
I don't because
sue you for defamation at this point.
Yeah, there are only a few names that would make me truly angry that if we hired Bob Chesney's not one of them. I think Bob Chesney's a hell of a coach. It's just I don't know how he's going to translate at this level with everything you're going to need to do. But there's only a few coaches that would really make me angry. A guy like Brian Kelly or even a Pat Fitzgerald or Greg Schiano. Like I just have no idea why you would bring those guys in.
Bill O'Brien's on there too.
Bill O'Brien, yeah, that's another one. Like I have no idea why you would hire them.
What about
But Bob Chesney, I understand the argument. I just personally wouldn't want him hired.
What about Manny Diaz? Because I'm not saying we've heard a lot about Manny Diaz lately, but I'm almost suspicious with how little we've heard about Manny Diaz as some of these bigger names have come off the list.
Yeah, I have a gut feeling he may not be in it.
Yeah, I would say I agree with that, given that we haven't heard very much at all. But why?
Don't forget, Manny never. I guess this goes back a little bit to, are you a Penn State guy? Like Manny's never really been up north before, except for Penn State. So he may not seriously be that interested in it. And maybe vice versa. And there's a whole thing with him and Pat Kraft at Temple. Manny Diaz said he accepted the Temple job, and then he ended up taking the Miami job, a week or two after. And it probably wouldn't bother me still if I was Pat Kraft, but it may, because it did kind of, it did.
Great point,
I could see it ruffling his feathers. If it was me, I'd probably be like, well, Miami greater than Temple, and he's from Miami. But I could still see hurt feelings there.
Yeah, absolutely hurt feelings, but also like the only exception where like, yeah, I understand you got to do what you got to do. All right, we're going to get out of here in a second. If you haven't already, make sure you've liked the video and you've subscribed on YouTube. If you've listening to the podcast, make sure you're subscribed there as well. We haven't got a 5-star review for a while, so drop us a 5-star review. We'll read on the show. All the graphics you see is from our boy Rhett Koblitz. RhettKoblitz.com is in the biography or the bio of the episode, the description of the episode. Wow, I couldn't think of the word. If you have any graphical needs, he's your man. He'll give you a little hardcore Penn State football discount. Sean, we mentioned a little bit on Kalen DeBoer. We didn't talk at all about a hypothetical of Lincoln Riley. Is there anyone else, though, that you want to bring up before we get out of here?
Lincoln Riley is a name that I actually had toward the front of my mind. Because there's been like rumblings underneath the surface that Lincoln Riley may want out at USC. USC may not be too enthralled with him either. Again, he's another name I probably wouldn't be angry if we got. We'd have fun offenses, but is that a guy that's really going to win you a national championship? I don't know.
Big 12 guy too.
Big 12 guy too. I will say his offenses have worked in the Big Ten. It's just you're not going to win the Big Ten with all offense. Like it's the same reason why whenever they get to the playoffs at Oklahoma, they would get run out of the building because they couldn't stop anybody. So that would be my caution with him. I don't know why he can't get a good defense. Like it feels like they invest a lot of money into it, and D'Anton Lynn is on paper a pretty good defensive coordinator, but they just haven't been able to do it. But could we do a lot worse than him? Yeah, we could.
You at least have fun quarterback play.
Yeah, at least we'd have a fun offense.
Yeah. All right. Well, I just want to wish everyone happy Thanksgiving. We will not be recording again until after Thanksgiving.
Think we have a coach next time we record?
Yeah. So my first inclination to all of this was no, right? And that's a good way to wrap this up, actually, Sean. So good last question. I do think people need to calm down a little bit. And I think like they're not behind schedule. I know maybe they're behind your personal schedule, but they're not behind schedule at all as far as when they plan to do this. And so I understand it's starting to seem bleak or desperate, like they're not going to get the guys they want. They were going to swing for the fences. And last time I checked, when you swing for the fences, you don't bat 1,000. So there were going to be misses. And that's literally the definition of swinging for the fences. You're going to swing and miss. And so just because they've swung and missed does not mean that Penn State's made a massive mistake and they didn't think this through and they shouldn't have got rid of James Franklin. Personally, I think James Franklin took the Virginia Tech job too soon. But Kraft doesn't fire Franklin if he doesn't have a plan. This is going to literally be his entire career and his legacy at Penn State. So calm down a little bit on like, oh, they're falling behind and this is about on schedule. Yes. Would I have loved if they got Mike Elko? Sure. Like, I'm not going to say it's all been perfect, but I originally didn't think they were going to have somebody until January. I am going to pivot now. I do think we'll have one right around the Big Ten championship. I think we do record another episode before we have before we have a head coach. But I do think the schedule has moved up from where I originally thought it was going to be.
I would agree with you. I think next time we record, we'll have a head coach.
So you do think, well, next time we record, I don't. I think we'll have another episode before a head coach.
Oh, you think another? Okay. Yeah, I think the next time we record.
Let's record tomorrow.
All right, well, then we won't. Yeah, because keep in mind, too, because I see a lot of people kind of panicking, too. The only two programs that I could think of that have made hires, one of them was just today. Oklahoma State hired North Texas's coach. His name escapes me, but they have fun offenses.
Morris.
Yeah, I forget what his first name is. But I actually think that was a really good hire for Oklahoma State. I think that's exactly what they're looking for. And Virginia Tech hired James Franklin, but there hasn't been any other hires yet. Like Lane Kiffin's still at Ole Miss, by the way. And I think part of this is Lane Kiffin still hasn't made a decision. I don't think any of the Jimmy Sexton clients have made decisions. For those of you who don't know, Lane Kiffin is James Franklin. Outside of James Franklin, none of the Jimmy Sexton guys have made decisions yet. Lane Kiffin, Bob Chesney, most of the big names that you're hearing are Jimmy Sexton clients. So you're wondering how he's going to be playing this as well. So I do think we get a head coach in there because I think they're going to want to get him in to hit the ground running in recruiting to try to somewhat salvage this wreck of a recruiting class that we have right now.
Yeah, and Eric Morris, by the way, was
Eric Morris. Yep. Yeah, like I said, good hire for Oklahoma State.
Very good hire. And again, that's where some of that regional thing comes into play, I think. It's perfect for them.
Yep.
All right, let's get out of here. Sean, always great getting back in the swing of things. Appreciate some patience. I was on the road the last couple of weeks. Happy Thanksgiving to everybody. Sean, your first Thanksgiving with another member of your family. I hope you have a fantastic Thanksgiving. Thank you all for watching. Thank you all for listening. This has been Hardcore Penn State Football. Until next time, good night and happy Thanksgiving. See y'all.
Happy Thanksgiving.